Hello, welcome to another edition of the Pace Report. I'm Brian Pace, reporting live here at the Jazz Standard here in New York City. Tonight I'm honored to showcase and profile a young trombonist who's been shaking up the jazz world with his band Catharsis. Ryan Keberle tonight is performing music with his band, and his brand new CD, The Hope I Hold, which is now available on iTunes as well as Amazon.com and CD Baby, is a reflection of personal thoughts of how he sees the world right now. In fact, he took some inspiration from the great Langston Hughes, and he composed some very, very touching and stirring compositions on this recording. Tonight, you're going to see highlights of his official record release performance of The Hope I Hold. And I sat down with him earlier to talk about some of his most important trombone influences and how they shaped the game of the trombone. Also, we sat down and talked about how him being an educator has inspired him to also teach as well as influence the next generation of musicians and educators, as well as talk about some of his musical influences. So sit back, relax, and enjoy highlights of the official The Hope I Hold official New York record release party here at the Jazz Standard, featuring Ryan Keberle and his group Catharsis, live here on the Pace Report, here at the Jazz Standard, here in New York City. Ryan, I'm at a loss of words because when I heard this recording, I noticed that there is a tone that you want your listeners to really, really comprehend musically where we are at this point in our country? And I noticed that the songs reflect a lot of hope as well as a lot of bleakness that's going on right now.
Yeah. Well, I think for me it's complicated because music is a powerful thing, and I think your listeners certainly know that, as do you and I. And for me, there's really very few other things out there that can move me and make me feel certain ways, or perhaps persuade me to think differently than music. And as an artist with a platform, albeit a small one, but a platform. In November of 2016, I decided it was my job to do my small part. It's all that I can do. So then the question becomes, well, how do you do that? Because the last thing people want to do when they're listening to music is feel like they're being preached to, or feel like they're being condescended to, or told to do this or that. So for me, I'm first and foremost looking to harness the power of music, even before words, just melody, harmony, rhythm, and try to create some music that tells its own story and that can move people on its own. And then you throw the words into that, and of course lyrics are incredibly powerful, very direct in certain cases. And so over the years I've been working with poets. In the case of our new album, I'm using the words of perhaps the greatest American poet in history, Langston Hughes, and letting those words also kind of speak for themselves. And I think when you throw it all together, it's definitely a powerful message, and it may not be for everyone, but we've performed all around the country, around the world, but with this specific set of music around the country, and in many cases performed in some fairly rural areas. In fact, we just got done performing in Iowa and Kansas and Missouri and Indiana, some of the most conservative states in our country. And we had people coming up to us of all political persuasions, thanking us for opening a dialogue, thanking us for not making it too divisive of an issue, but we're looking to use music to bring people in and to let people know how we feel, which is a feeling of compassion for one another, a feeling of empathy for one another. And I think if we start there, we will be in a better position down the road.
Ryan, I'm from Indianapolis.
Oh, cool.
I'm from the Midwest. I'm upset at the fact that, one, music used to have this healing force, whether it be gospel, whether it be blues, whether it be jazz, and it seems like complacency seems to be the key of the whole dynamic right now. If you don't say anything or go against the grain, they look at you as crazy.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering what really triggered everything off right now, because you're getting a lot of positive press for this recording.
Thank you very much. Well, it's what you're saying. For me, the reason I'm a musician is because of that force, that musical force. That is why I play music. And to be perfectly honest, it's not just about me wanting to bring that to other people. It's for me, music moves me in deep and powerful ways, and I want to surround myself with that. And whether it's music of catharsis, my own music, or whether it's listening to other music that moves me in different ways, that's what I want to be around all the time. So I think that we need to just continue to bring that message to other people, because I think that by and large, most Americans probably have never experienced that power because of the complacency that you referenced, because that's found throughout pop culture these days, and it's been that way for a long time, and it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. So a lot of people have never experienced that kind of musical power, and so it's our job to try and introduce people to just what's possible, when you sit down and you put on a pair of headphones, or you sit down and you experience a live musical performance.
Explain to my viewers the concept of catharsis. This is a band that you have been your working band for the last 5 or 6 years now. You have a very beautiful addition to this, because I've interviewed Miss Mesa on my program last year.
Oh, beautiful.
And there's also, I noticed too with this recording, there's some world music elements in this also.
Absolutely. Well, catharsis. I mean, I think the name of the band pretty much sums up what the music is all about. It is about bringing this kind of emotional release through music to our listeners and for ourselves as well, like I mentioned. And for me personally, that can come from any style of music. I mean, I'm a trained jazz musician. I love jazz. In many ways, I'm a traditionalist and a purist at heart. Um, but I love so many other kinds of music, and every genre of music throughout the history of music has examples of music that can move people emotionally. I think for us in this country, the most relevant and perhaps the most um, um, uh, effective example of that would be African American folk music. Even predating the blues, things like field hollers and work songs. I mean, that's what that music was about. It was literally people releasing emotion in an era and in a time when they had no other form of release. So for me, I want to harness that. And something I've learned over the years is that this kind of Afrocentric tradition of emotional release through music exists in many other countries. It exists in Cuba. It exists in Brazil, throughout South America. And so slowly but surely, I've tried to immerse myself in some other traditions that share that Afrocentric musical heritage. And I've played a ton of Cuban music over the years, Latin jazz, but for me recently, my love, far and away beyond all else, it probably borders on an obsession, is the music of popular Brazilian music of the 1970s. They call it Música Popular Brasileira, MPB. And it all started in the late 60s with Milton Nascimento and this group of musicians from the north of Brazil, Minas Gerais region. And I've just literally just been tumbling down this rabbit hole of MPB for the last couple of years. I spent about a month there 2 years ago when I was on sabbatical from my teaching position, and just have never looked back. So this music that we're currently playing and that your listeners can hear on our new album definitely reflects those influences. To others faithful, return. My mind draws open to swallow the stars and open. Now I can see how small I have been.
I've done 650 of these episodes. And I don't even think I've had a handful of trombone players. I've interviewed Clifton Anderson
Yeah.
and Natalie Cressman, and now there's you. Tell me about how the trombone crept into your psyche. Because you didn't start off on the trombone.
No, I didn't. I started off on violin and then piano shortly thereafter. My parents are musicians, so I owe everything to them. And my grandparents are musicians, so in many ways I owe everything to my grandparents. But my dad started me on trombone. He's a jazz educator and trumpet player, and he always needed trombonists in his college bands. So I was playing trombone at like university big band level when I was like 13 years old, and he led our local professional jazz orchestra. I was playing in that in high school. So trombone, specifically big band jazz trombone, was really what for me started it all, and that's still a real love of mine. And for better or for worse, I still do a lot of big band trombone gigs. But the trombone is an expressive tool, but at the same time, what gives it that expressive power also makes it perhaps not quite as tidy and neat and clean and precise as the instruments that you're typically going to hear today in a jazz setting. Think guitar, piano, and tenor saxophone. These instruments generally, these are very general terms, but they don't really have to worry about being in tune, at least not on a note-to-note basis like the trombone does. The only other instrument that you see commonly in jazz that has to deal with that would be the upright bass or perhaps violin, stringed instruments. But like stringed instruments, every time you pick up your horn, you play a note, you're probably going to be out of tune. So you have two approaches, two different ways to think about this. Number one is I'm always going to be out of tune, just what it is, and accept it. Or the way I approach it is actually that same power or that same technical component that creates this challenge also allows us to always be in tune. So on the flip side, we can actually be more in tune all the time if we're really keyed into that sonically than a piano or guitar, because for them it is what it is, and wherever they tune their instrument, wherever the piano tuner tuned the instrument, that is where it is for that moment. But we're constantly adjusting, and so that power for us to always be in tune as opposed to out of tune is the same power that gives the instrument such an expressive range. And I see more and more young trombonists like Natalie, and there's a list that's really a golden age of trombone right now. People like Mike Dees and Marshall Gilks.
I interviewed Mike.
Oh, you did? Okay, well, as you should. Marshall's another one you should interview. Elliot Mason, who plays with Winton. The list is long. There's a new generation of trombonists who are doing things with the instrument technically that have never been done before, not even close. Things that no one else dreamed about doing a generation ago. So I think it's going to look different 20 years from now. You're going to see a lot more trombonists leading bands, and hopefully you'll find yourself interviewing more trombonists down the road.
I got to do a trombone shorty one also.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, he's doing some things very differently with the music by way of his New Orleans roots.
Absolutely, but he's bringing the music to the people, man, and that's what we're all about. I mean, that's in today's day and age of internet and instant gratification and an overload of information, to me, the most important thing we can do as performing artists is to perform for live audiences and perform for other human beings in the same room. There's absolutely no replacing that, and I think it's becoming more and more of a powerful setting as so much of our world moves into the box, so to speak, the computer.
You know, I'm going to bring up some very important names of the who played the trombone and brought it to a very, very, very different vernacular in the world of jazz. The first one is he's from my hometown.
Okay, well, I know who you're going to say.
J.J. Johnson.
J.J. Johnson. We just had the International Trombone Festival in just outside of Indianapolis just last week. And we had a big jazz concert Friday night, and it was dedicated to JJ. And his widow Vivian even was in the audience, which for me was really, really special. JJ is my all-time hero, and not just because of his brilliance on the trombone, which was unparalleled at the time, but also because of his beauty as a musician, as inner musician, which was reflected in his compositions and his arrangements. He was a master composer and arranger, orchestrator, and he actually made a living doing that in L.A. throughout the 1970s, writing music for hit television and movie soundtracks. But for me, that is still the pinnacle and the what we all strive for.
The next one, I think this man, he's still kicking it, and time is still ticking.
Yeah.
I'm talking about Curtis Fuller.
Absolutely. No, I mean, again, right up there with JJ in terms of people who were finding ways to translate this modern jazz language to the trombone. It's just not. It's very, very difficult to play the music of Charlie Parker, the music of John Coltrane, Freddie Hubbard on the trombone. It just doesn't translate well. So these guys were the first. They were the ones who figured out how to make that work. And they did so in very, very convincing and very musical ways. So yeah, Curtis, of course, is someone who, like you mentioned, still around. And I mean, we can count people of his generation, I think, on one or two hands these days, sadly. So all the power to him, man. And he's a living legend.
And you know, I always say Curtis Fuller's Swan Song, the best record he ever played on was that Blue Train record, on Blue Note.
Yeah, I think aside from his great playing, that record is truly, I think, a desert island record for most jazz musicians. It was such a talk about a catharsis, talk about emotion and music, and what's particularly interesting about that album is it's full of emotion, full of energy and life, but it's also incredibly complex, and the technical virtuosity on display on that record is unbelievable. And I find it very difficult to put those two together, but it is certainly possible in the hands of these masters and these geniuses. But in a day and age now when virtuosity is so celebrated, and I think it's because it's easy to measure. You know, it's very obvious when someone is a virtuoso. It's much less obvious to recognize really great music or really emotionally emotive music. That requires a little bit more insight, a little bit more experience with music, and just a more developed sense of how you hear, right? How you not just hear but listen, how you listen. So, you know, these guys, Curtis Fuller, Blue Train, this is the pinnacle in terms of how you can do all those things.
The next one I'm going to mention, he could swing, he could write, but he was also a very, very proficient educator, Bob Brookmire.
Oh, I honestly think Bob might be the most underrated improviser in modern jazz. He is incredible. And because his writing was so good and because he was so successful as a writer early in his career, people tend to overlook his playing. That's just what we like to do. We love to pigeonhole, we love to compartmentalize. But I think the best record to exemplify that for your listeners who haven't heard it, there's a duo record of Bob with Jim Hall.
Yes.
Live at North Sea. And it is unbelievable. The two of those guys are just true masters at the kind of modern bebop language, conversing, making music for an hour nonstop. Just pure beauty.
You know, another record that I loved that he did was the Bob Brookmire and Friends record with Stan Getz and Elvin Jones.
Yeah.
I mean, they're ballads. There's some funky swing stuff. I mean, he covers really the whole gamut of the whole jazz spectrum on that record.
He really does, and including more avant-garde styles, and you hear that in his writing. He's one of the first people to really bring in that kind of third stream idea, but bring it into a traditional vernacular. You know what I mean? When he played jazz, to me it always sounds like jazz, traditional jazz, but he was somehow able to bring in all these different influences from outside that traditional jazz world and still make it sound like jazz, you know, like what we all know and love. Yeah, I honestly don't know how he does that or how he did that.
The last one, and we're going to jump musical genres because I think Mr. Fred Wesley has to be acknowledged as he's to soul music as what J.J. Johnson and Bob Brookmire were to jazz.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, if I had to pick one trombonist to listen to who's still around, Fred would be at the very top of that list. I love playing more kind of funky R&B soul influenced music. That's a love of mine, both listening and playing. Talk about kind of the perfect setting for the trombone. You know, I was mentioning that expressive quality of the instrument. It's in that arena where it really can shine. And Fred was, again, one of the first to really kind of figure out exactly how to bring that soul language to the trombone. I love Fred Wesley. I'm a huge fan.
And Fred left James Brown and left Parliament Funkadelic and went and played with the Count Basie Orchestra.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, so talk about, again, just like drawing from all these different musical worlds. Now, of course, these musical worlds share certain qualities, that Afrocentric tradition I mentioned earlier, but very different languages. I mean, the Count Basie language is miles apart from the P-Funk language. But drawing on all those different languages, that's why he's such a special player, because he is such a versatile musician, and his language is greater than just one idiom. And all of my favorite musicians fall into that category. Musicians who have their own personal language that is informed by many different walks of life and different backgrounds and cultures, and etc.
You know, Fred acted a fool on Papa Don't Take No Mess.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you got to do that, you know? You got to have that little sense of humor. It's important.
talk about education. I know that you are the director of jazz and brass studies at Hunter College here in New York, and you've been doing this for a minute. And you being a young fella, what is it that you are instilling in wanting the next educators and musicians to understand about the lineage of this music?
Well, that's easy. I mean, for me, you can't get to any kind of substantive discussion without really just focusing purely on listening skills. Young people these days are, I think, the worst listeners in the history of humankind. And there probably are scientific studies to back that up, maybe not. But, we don't listen anymore. We watch. Everything is visual. And the minute you start being stimulated visually, that aural stimulation goes down, or those aural sensors go down. So I spend almost all my time in all my classes in different ways just talking about what it really means to listen. And basically, I'm trying to demonstrate, okay, well, did you hear that? Because I heard this. Oh, wait, did you just hear this? Trying to highlight all these beautiful details of the music that not just young people, but most inexperienced listeners are missing. And once you start hearing those details, suddenly a whole new musical world opens up. And now you can start talking about things like swing and things like the blues language and things like expression. But none of that is possible to really get into before you deal pretty seriously with developing one's ability to listen, not to hear. Not just hearing is just noise. Listening is making sense of the noise. So that for me is everything these days.
Do you think that, and you brought up something that was very important about visual, do you think that there is a lack of going back to transcribing as well as going back and listening to a lot of the masters also?
I think young people probably listen to traditional styles just as much as we did in my generation or the generation before, but I'm not sure that what they're hearing, what they're listening to, the details they're gleaning from that experience are as meaningful because of the visual stimulation. And I know that because most of my students listen to most of their music on YouTube. So even if there's not a video, there's still some kind of visual image on the screen. Maybe it's just the album cover. And they sit there and they stare at that. There's nothing to see. It's just a non-moving album cover, and they just sit there and stare at it. And I know for a fact from my own experiences that they're not hearing what they should be hearing because of that visual stimulation. You got to shut your eyes. You got to lay down. You got to get inside the music to really start to hear the details that make jazz so beautiful.
That is missing. I mean, I still buy vinyl to this day, and putting it on the turntable and reading the liner notes about the music.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's an art I think really has taken away and actually dumbed a lot of the next music, the music generation.
All the details that we used to love to check out. Who composed a song? Who arranged a song? Who produced the song? All that's gone. Even if it's embedded somewhere in the YouTube description, most people don't take the time to click and scroll down and read it. So, no, it's the world we live in, and it's the Wild West right now. So it's foolish for us to think this is the way it's always going to be. This is the way it is right now, and it's the way it is right now has been more or less 100% dictated to us by corporations, massive corporations. And so once again, it's our job as musicians and artists to try and maybe find some other ways, to do things and hopefully educate our audiences and hopefully create some kind of popular movement to demand better. That's all we can do at this point.
Ryan Keberle, what does jazz music mean to you?
Jazz music to me is a way of life. It is everything. It is what true jazz musicians wake up thinking about, hearing in their head, singing. It's a way you move through life. It's about improvisation. It's about the blues, and it's about expressing oneself through your music. It's about rhythmic nuance and swing, the rhythmic detail that came down from us from the Afrocentric influences here in our country, and it's just beauty. It means it's beauty. Yeah.
That'll do it again for another edition of the Pace Report, reporting live here at the Jazz Standard here in New York City. I'd like to personally congratulate Mr. Ryan Keberle and his band Catharsis for their warm hospitality Also, make sure you go out and support his brand new CD, which is now available on his website as well as Greenleaf Records. You can buy it on Amazon.com as well as CD Baby, and you can download it on Apple Music. I'd like to personally thank the staff and management here at the Jazz Standard for their warm hospitality. Also, Matt Merowitz over at Fully Altered Media for arranging my time with Ryan. As always, please visit my website, www.thepacereport.com, for my weekly column as well as my past segments. Also, please like, share, and subscribe to my videos on my page on YouTube as well as Vimeo. And feel free to leave comments on the content that you see here on The Pace Report. Until next time, remember, if it's in the groove, it'll make you move. Till next time, peace.